This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring, ring, ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hey man, Sunday afternoon here. The family are away on holiday, so I've just had a very, very, very rare matinee of a adult movie. I say adult movie because I often have a matinee on a Sunday, but it's always Moana or Wallace and Gromit or something like that. So yeah, nice to just, it's very early in the day. It's 2:30 in the afternoon and I've already watched a film that's not for kids. So that's kind of nice. Film that we started, well, we had a conversation about 2 weeks ago, I'd say, about a film called Day Trippers, or The Day Trippers. And I think we both really enjoyed it. And I remember when I watched it, it really brought to mind the films I'd seen by this director, Hal Hartley. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the correct series of events. I think I mentioned that to you, and then that sort of sparked your curiosity in him. You probably heard the name plenty of times over the years. I have heard him referenced a lot more than I've seen his films. I've seen, I believe, the first two movies he made, and I haven't seen those for many, many years. So I'm kind of like, I only retain a little bit of memory of him, but I also kind of group him together with a bunch of other directors. And they're not, all these directors aren't doing the exact same thing. So it's not like I can't necessarily think of other directors that are like, oh, well, Hal Hartley and that director both give you the same thing. But there's something at least about the first two movies by Hal Hartley. I think that those are the ones I've seen. And today I've watched the second of his films, Trust, which you mentioned that you were curious to see. So I thought, well, if you're going to watch it anyway, I'll revisit it. I've been wanting to get back on the Hal Hartley train again for years. And I think his first movie might have made a little bit more of an impression on me in terms of considering what his style is. But there's a collection of directors. So I would put the very early works of Wes Anderson in this, specifically Bottle Rocket, but also Rushmore as well, I would say. I'd put Aki Kaurismäki in there. I'd put Jim Jarmusch in there. There's stray films like Day Trippers that are maybe not part of an oeuvre, but are single works from the 90s, which kind of like breezy, slice of life. Could be quirky and surreal, could be like more kitchen sinky. Usually these films, the ones I've mentioned anyway, are somewhat surreal, kind of like they're not trying to exactly depict our reality, but in terms of the scenery you're seeing, they're very banal. So you got this kind of like, it's stylized, but not through the visuals. Obviously later Wes Anderson stuff would be very visually stylized, but the films like this and like Trust, where it's kind of a bit of a dream world in a way. It's a bit of a fable, a bit of a fairy tale, but it's just like diners and laundromats and bus stops and just the most basic shit that's in every town. That, I feel like that was a big thing in the 90s. And something I don't necessarily feel like I see that much anymore. Maybe the modern day version of these films are much more realistic. They're not quite as stylized, I don't know, in terms of like the characters and events and stuff. So this is a film that I've seen maybe 15 years ago. And I kind of have a slightly different memory of it, and it could be because I'm sort of conflating it with, I think it's called The Unbelievable Truth, his debut film. But I remembered his films as being more uneventful. This has much more activity going on. There's literally a grenade in the movie, and there's lots of like punch outs and big events, big seismic changes in people's lives happening. I remembered it being a little bit more like uneventful. A movie that we reference in almost every conversation we have, Patterson, comes to mind as like, you can get a lot of character drama from not much actually happening in the movie. But I also remember his films being quite feel-goody, almost like life-affirming feel-good, like Wes Anderson does, where you come away feeling quite positive. So I didn't remember how dark this film is and how acerbic, and it's not a cynical movie, but the stuff in this movie is the people are living very tortured and troubled lives. Another film that came to mind, maybe because of the way she's dressed in the early parts of the film, was Heathers, where it's like, yes, it's sort of like a coming of age, teenage kind of thing, but it's also like super edgy and dark, and not edgy for the sake of edgy, but it's just like, literally the opening scene in the movie, she has a massive argument with her father, who calls her a slut and a tramp, and she slaps him, and she leaves home. Essentially, he kicks her out, and then he just immediately has a heart attack and dies. And it doesn't really get less intense from that point on. It's not intense like a Chris Nolan movie. It's not trying to be overly intense. It's just, a movie about people who are broken. I think a great example of that is the Matthew's father, who literally doesn't relent for the entire movie in his repressed, and he's completely controlled by anger. You get this little, and this is probably what I'm taking away as like the feel good bam that I associate with his films. You get this bit at the end where it looks like maybe her mother and his father, who are two immensely broken people, maybe there's a glimmer of like they might have actually found some codependency, or like that could happen, where she goes, "You look what you've done to my cabinets." She's like, "Well, get me a hammer and I'll fix them." It's like, "Well, do you want something to eat?" And it's like, okay, neither of these people are ever going to be liberated from their emotional burdens, but maybe they could make it work. And the ending of it is very Baby Driver as well, where it's like, we're not going to have them walking off into the sunset hand in hand, but we're also going to give you enough feeling here that maybe it could end up all right for these kids. I definitely like this movie. I liked it back in the day. I like it now. I think I'm interested to watch more of his films now, because I'd kind of forgotten exactly what his sort of shtick was. And I think his films might be more enjoyable, or maybe less enjoyable, who knows, when you kind of are, here's the next one, it's going to be more in his sort of thing. I believe across his filmography there's some sort of an expanded universe, because the books, a lot of the books that he's reading are written by an author, I think it's Ned Rifle maybe, and that one of his later films is called Ned Rifle. Now I don't know if that's a fictional author that's just like, like Tarantino putting the red apple cigarettes and stuff in, and then I'm not really sure the specifics, but I think there is kind of like Kevin Smith or whatever, that he's got a little bit of his own world that he's created across his films, but certainly the ones I've seen feel very standalone. Really enjoyed all of the characters and the actors in the movie. You get to see, I mean, it's interesting watching this now, because it's filmed from 1990. obviously we were both alive, but we were little kids at that point, so we don't have much of a barometer of what adulthood or young adulthood or whatever was in 1990. We might remember viewing it, we might remember this kind of the superficial aesthetics of it, but we don't remember kind of living it and struggling with it and stuff. And there's constant references to like, he's too old for her, what are you doing running around with, I can't remember what age she is. She's obviously a teenager still in high school. I guess maybe she's like 17 or something. But him, what age he is very difficult to pin down, because, I mean, for us now, for me at least, we're watching this in 2025, because nobody wears those kind of like, you know, a trench coat, that kind of clothing. Like if you put a character in a movie in 2025 who's dressed like that, looks like that, kind of chain smoking, everything like that, you're sort of depicting someone in their 50s, whereas I reckon that this character is supposed to be early 20s, but it's difficult to know. So her, you get the natural coming of age wake up call of like, she is entrenched in a sort of high school archetype that she very naively, no pun intended, very naively feels is her ticket to womanhood and adulthood. And this is that she's kind of got it made in terms of the life that it's all simple to her. And then that rug gets pulled out from under her, and we watch her sort of scramble to establish a much more bespoke persona. Not even persona, it's like literally finding her true self and her voice. And by the end of the movie, you know, the end shot more or less of the movie is her raising the glasses up to her head, and she's become her own person. And with him it's a bit different because he's a bit older. He's not going through that, like everyone finds themselves at that kind of like late teens, early 20s. They kind of level up their independence and like sense of self. Him, he's a bit more nebulous to me in terms of where he is in his life. Is he early 20s? Is he late 20s? Conceivably, he could be older. I don't think so. But, and his character, like where we find him, it reminds me a bit of like a Catcher in the Rye type of like angry young person. Like, obviously he has sort of justifiable anger in the sense that his mother died in childbirth, and it seems like his entire upbringing with his dad, who he's lived with for his entire life, we're led to believe, although I think they do mention he's gone to juvie and stuff, but you know, his life probably hasn't been the most pleasant thing in the world, to put it lightly. But his exact way that his sort of anger with the world manifests as this sort of superior, really anal fixated on like high levels of virtue in technology or psychology or whatever. Like, you know, he looks down his nose at everything, and he thinks that everything around him is shit, basically. I mean, that's it. I was going to say that's more like movie like or something, but I have met plenty of people like that, and I suppose we all have a little bit of that. But this is kind of a movie where all of the characters and their shortcomings, or the things that are controlling them, we can probably relate to all of that stuff in terms of a "there but for the grace of God go I" kind of thing, of like Edie Falco, for example. She has that, like, she got into a relationship and got married and had kids really young, at least really, really young by our generation's standard. That relationship has collapsed, and she's now back living at home. Seems to be pretty dissatisfied with life. Certainly doesn't seem to have much communication with her children, stuff like that. And, you know, the mother who, you know, we don't really, a lot of it's like guesswork of like, what's her story been over the past like 30 years in terms of her relationship with her husband and her, like how much she felt like she got the life that she wanted and all these kind of things. But although the people are like more fucked up than certainly I feel I am, there's still, you can look within all these people and go, yeah, that's almost like a worst case scenario or just like a bad case scenario of pretty relatable struggles percolating and marinating over years and just becoming like the worst version of it in a way. So it's both a surreal movie, like putting the boss's head in the vice and everything like that, but also if you come from small town fucking back arse of nowhere like we do, and you've seen countless people struggle psychologically and emotionally and just in character wise with like clashing with all of the claustrophobia of that. And of course I now I'm older and I've got lots of reverence for the kind of small town life. So I don't mean to like, you know, tar it all with one brush, but definitely a lot of the small town angst that is in this film is stuff that I've seen very visibly. I just haven't, it's just obviously not manifested in quite so fairy tale-y a kind of way. It's a good classic like 90s or like, you know, late 80s 90s American indie film, like that kind of Miramax vibe of we're going to get loads of value out of just weird little happenstances that occur at a liquor store or at, you know, a bench on the street or, you know, in a kitchen or something like that. Like the script and the actors and everything being king. So, you know, I'm kind of predisposed to like this kind of stuff, and also just because for nostalgia reasons, like you can clearly tell from the music and even just the quality of the visuals you're seeing, it positions it in a era that I have a lot of nostalgia for. So I'm more inclined to like this film even beyond its kind of merits. But yeah, definitely a good little movie. Interesting to hear what your thoughts on it are. I do think it's probably one of these ones that is a bit open to being watched at the wrong time or watched in the wrong headspace, whatever, because it's a bit on that kind of quirky kind of level. But I've always liked this thing, and Aki Kaurismäki's kind of king of this, of like, really, if you just tell someone the plot of the movie, it's just like characters just bumbling around some like town or something like that, and you know, making a cup of tea and smoking a cigarette and, you know, like meeting up with someone here, and just it's very, very banal stuff, but the atmosphere and the exact kind of like you just, the more it goes on, the more you start getting drawn more into this world. By the end of it, you really feel like they've made this amazing universe. Like there's a scene where he goes into the bar, it's like the liquor store guy's there with like an eye patch over one eye. Her ex, the football player, is there, and this it's got one thing that came to mind, which is like tonally incredibly different, but you know those kind of cozy things like Gilmore Girls, where it's like, this is a cozy rose-tinted glasses depiction of small town American life, and this is kind of that, but with much more of a dark edge to it. And you know, you kind of get your cake and eat it in a way. You get that like, oh, I'm really living in this town, I'm really hanging out in this town, but without the saccharine sweet, there, you know, kind of a bit more emotionally and psychologically sanitized thing that you get in a lot of like cozy content. So yeah, Very much a film that relies on an emotional response from the viewer, I think. So that's why I think it's maybe a bit, you got to be in the right headspace. Not that there's like only one really hyper-specific headspace you need to be in, but I just think there's probably an opportunity to watch this film when you really aren't in the right headspace for it. Maybe you're looking for some like thriller, like, you know, something a bit more like exciting or whatever, that this could be a bit like, well, what the fuck's even going on here? But I know this is kind of in your wheelhouse, this type of film, so hopefully it hits the right spots for you. But yeah, let me know what you think of it.
Hey man, finished the Trust yesterday there and didn't get a chance to have a voice note until today. So this works as a reply to both our chats, really, as to whether I'd seen it or not. So I think you've hit the nail on the head in the vibe of this movie, which I couldn't actually get on board with, to be honest. And just hearing how you put it, I almost wish I got to that point early in the movie, or at all, really. It's not a spoiler plot wise, but sometimes a spoiler vibe wise isn't the worst thing. Like in a movie like Patterson, which you mentioned, and we will continue to mention till the end of time. If you say it's the kind of movie where nothing happens, that's not necessarily a spoiler, really. But in a movie like this, you said, well, I'm going to paraphrase, as I often do when I try and recall what you said, but you said that it's a movie set in ordinary places, very mundane, like coffee shops and bars, but what you see is not what would exist in those places, like a bit magical. And I don't mean magical in a Disney type of way, but just a little bit, I guess, like you said, Wes Anderson almost is a good way of putting it. Whereas if you're just looking at it with the sound down, it would look like a very 90s inspired indie movie, where it's just, you probably think you're watching something that's very slice of life with the sound down, but it's not slice of life at all. And that's what I struggled with quite a lot with this movie. And you asked me, am I chomping at the bit, or whatever you said, about some more movies, and are we ready to investigate? It's an interesting question, because there is a few things in this movie that I did like, and there's not things I dislike per se, but I was quite bored at times, and I didn't really connect with the movie. And this is the subtle difference so far. You mentioned it is my vibe. I'd argue that it very much isn't my vibe, and there's subtle differences within these type of movies that make something a Little Miss Sunshine. Not that this movie is Little Miss Sunshine, but make something go off the boil in order for a version that I would enjoy. My biggest problem with this movie, I think, was Martin Donovan, the main guy. I didn't really buy him as his character. Now, again, there was a bit of conflict between how real I meant to take this and how realistic in a portrayal of a character I meant to see. And then there's some of the things that is very probably indicative of a filmmaker in the beginning phases of his career that perhaps made me think that some of the more quirky elements of this movie were just things that weren't as technically proficient as they could be. Like there's a scene where the father character puts his head, puts Martin Donovan's head in the fridge and slams the door, and it's almost like WWE because you can see Martin Donovan setting up the spot, so to speak, where he's almost holding the fridge himself and helping with it. Just not really good enough for me to immerse myself in that scene. And then there's scenes like, which is actually a very good scene, I will say. And there's a few key things in this movie that may make me go back to it quicker if another movie, I mean, go back to it quicker if you go ahead and then I get the prompt from you and a little bit of setup about what to expect in using maybe this movie as a reference. So some of the acting is very non-professional, I want to say, not from Martin Donovan and not from the main woman who I really liked. I can't remember her name now. Adrienne Shelley, I think is her name. I thought they were quite good, and Eddie Falco is good. I just mean some of the peripheral characters that they get, like the people in the liquor store and stuff like that, and the style of acting itself is almost something from the 60s and very stage-like at times, which again jarred me with the setting itself. And I just didn't buy Martin Donovan as this guy who went to juvie as this hard ass and just punching people around. There's just something completely miscast about him in that way. And it's not so much his physicality, because he's a tall enough guy and he does have this type of brooding presence, but just how it's handled and the type of punches, which is a little bit slapstick and surreal almost. But yeah, I couldn't really get to grips with a lot of things in this movie. And I think it's a type of movie I would have liked a lot more had I seen it in the 90s itself, or had seen it maybe pre the creme de la creme of these type of polished movies that came later, inspired by it. I mean, you mentioned Wes Anderson. I feel this is very Noah Baumbach territory in a way, but without the type of signature dialogue, but just this type of characters are reminded me of Noah Baumbach's type of characters. And I think that was a problem because I almost expected the dialogue to come with it. And yeah, again, Martin Donovan, even what he's wearing, and I don't know, I just thought he was just quite mishandled in how he's meant to be portrayed. He's almost like a grown-up Bender from Breakfast Club when life has kicked him way too many times, which would have been good if I think the actor pulled it off. And I really liked the Adrienne Shelley character that she plays. I like the clothes she's wearing is quite iconic, maybe that image of the heels and whatnot, and then having to change into the modest dress. And to be fair, his outfit is quite iconic in a way as well, in terms of the suit and the tie, but a kind of disheveled looking, is it a misanthrope he always comes across as? So I did like the idea of the character and the characters in general themselves. I thought it was an interesting type of character to follow. And the Martin Donovan guy, he didn't really have many redeeming features, and he didn't really have much likability, which I always think is a much more rewarding character to try and follow if you can crack that nut, because it's not giving you the easy things. Oh, he's nice to his dad. Oh, he's helps an old lady across the road. It's like that scene in Family Guy where this guy just pulls a knife from someone in the office and he just goes crazy, and then one of the office workers is like, "Oh, that guy's crazy," and then he turns, "Yeah, well, that guy who has a knife and is attacking people and is so crazy, he feeds orphans on a Saturday, okay?" And then there's a knowing look from Peter Griffin, like, "Okay, I understand him now," even though it doesn't make any sense. There's that trick that's pulled a lot in these type of movies when you follow these unfortunate, these unlikable characters, and I admire movies that don't give you that cheap in, because you can still feel sorry for a character and want the character to do the right thing if they are well written enough, which, to be fair, I think the two main characters are well written in this movie. And you mentioned it's a coming of age story. Yeah, for me, and I don't doubt what you say, but I feel like what's quite remarkable about this coming of age story is that it comes down among the line of don't grow up too quickly, because at one stage she's pregnant, she wants to have an abortion, because her jock boyfriend, who does not look like a jock at all, doesn't want anything to do with it, and then she's forced to grow up. But then this movie does an interesting trick where within the space of a few weeks she is forced to grow up, but she seems like she's lived way more years than she has. She's on her way to get married. She moves in with Martin Donovan, or at least Martin Donovan moves in with her, and it feels like the relationship has moved way more years than it has. And by the end of it, it almost feels like they have got a divorce. I'm talking about the house scenes, not the scenes at the end when he drives away. Yeah, so it's not that I don't admire some of the things that were done in this film, and I'm not quite discounting that I'll end up liking this guy, because we had Perfect Days when we were in the first, which was an amazing movie, but then we went back to Paris, Texas, and didn't really do it for me, and then I became a big advocate of Venice, so there is precedent for that. So I'll point to a few moments in this movie that give me hope, and I found something quite good in, and maybe that can be built upon. One is I really enjoyed this very underserved, well, maybe underserved is the wrong word, but it's not as prominent as it would be, subplot of the Adrienne Shelley character. She is outside a liquor store, and then she gets money from this woman, and then it turns out that this woman she takes a baby, and then there's a little very, very subtle detective story for a few moments where she recalls the mother saying that, or the woman she talked to saying that she has a husband who has a pipe and gets at the 5 p.m. train, and then they go there and they have a look, and you see it being only people with pipes and trench coats and everything walking down at that time. And even though the shot itself is very, not to say primitive, but it's very, unimaginative in a way. Not that that's necessarily a problem, but it nails the job, but it also draws attention to this type of absurd punchline to the joke. So it would be interesting to follow where that type of instinct of a scene will go in later movies, I suppose. And then I really like the way that they're investigating further on the cars, and they're doing a little bit of a track down. And when she finally meets the husband, there's not a big showdown, and she mentions that, oh, here's your wife's £5 back, and then you just see a news story that the baby's been returned in a phone box. And I really liked how that was handled, and that's the type of filmmaker I would follow, and we don't get enough of it in this movie. But that scene was very, very interesting to me, and it was one of the few times where I stood up and thought, okay, we've got something here. And there's another scene with, in its conception and the layers upon it, that I quite liked, and that's with the Eva mother character when she's having a drink with Martin Donovan, and they have a drink off, and then he gets pushed over, and again, just how he falls, it's not quite there yet. Like, I'm not saying you have to change the style, but it's not quite the definitive version of that type of style. And she brings him upstairs, and then she puts her in the bed of the Eddie Falco character, and then Eddie Falco character comes home, and she goes upstairs and sees him in the bed and basically sexually assaults him by today's standards, but that's not what the movie is trying to say. So let's just park that there. And then Adrienne Shelley comes home, and she is downstairs talking to the mother, and then you find out, actually, when the Eddie Falco character comes home, that, oh, the mother hasn't been drinking the vodka as much. She's been watering it, so it's pre-planned, and that's a nice little wrinkle to it. It's not new stuff, but just in how the scene is handled, it's quite good. And then, like I said, Eddie Falco goes to bed and basically tries it on with him. And Adrienne Shelley, the mother, says to her, okay, go upstairs and get the hairpin or whatever the fuck she's talking about. She goes up, and you're expecting something to happen and a big confrontation, and then you hear nothing, and then you're waiting to see what the mother's thinking, you're waiting to see what Adrienne Shelley's thinking, and then Adrienne Shelley comes back with the hairpin, and there's nothing. There's no reaction or anything. And then the mother goes upstairs, and you're still thinking, okay, is he gone? Has he been put into the bed? Is Eddie Falco done the right thing? And then she looks in, no, he has been there in the bed. And this Adrienne Shelley, it just hasn't unfolded or been reacted in the way that had your mind thinking in real time in this scene. So yeah, I like a guy who can do something like that. And so there are things to admire and build upon in this movie, for sure. But I always go by my entertainment and my enjoyment value, and it was quite low compared to these other type of movies in my wheelhouse. And oh yeah, just final note, it's nice to see Matt Malloy, who's the co-star with Aaron Eckhart in The Company of Men, pop up in this, as well as the boss in the computer factory or whatever it was. And yeah, like you mentioned, there's also a good scene where you get a line of dialogue with the mother and the dad, who's also a fucking prick, and you get a line where you're thinking, are they gonna enter something? And also the scene where they go into the repair shop of the TV, and he's just trying to negotiate what job he wants, and he's like, £200 if I don't have to do any TVs. So there are moments in this movie that I enjoyed, but there's far and few between, and it is just very difficult to get on board with tonally for me within that. But I like what you said about the everyday type of landscapes and set pieces and whatnot that has these type of absurd elements within them. I guess I'll have to have that in my mind should I wish to go further.
Yeah, really nice to see Matt Malloy popping up there. And I think he's in The Unbelievable Truth as well. And there was a couple of, obviously, Edie Falco's in there, but there's a couple of people who I recognized. The nurse who appears later in the movie, who performs the abortion. I don't know the name of the actress, but I've seen her in a few things. And yeah, that's one nice thing about going back and watching old indie movies, because you're watching people kind of getting either their big break, or this wasn't even their big break. Their big break would come later, and this is just like you know, they managed to get this job, probably meant the absolute fucking world to them to be in one scene of a real like feature length movie. And yeah, I think like obviously there's a disconnect between us in terms of how much we've enjoyed the movie. Some of the stuff you're mentioning, like that scene in the TV repair shop where they're negotiating and where he's like, just it basically details his character so well. You know, it's like a scene from Big Lebowski or something where you're just like getting such a great exhibit of who people are. This movie is absolutely fucking laden with those kind of scenes, and it's a very, like I said, it's a very banal environment. It's people walking from house to house, to street, to shop, to this, to that. Like it's basic. It's the kind of like place that they don't show you in movies, you know. Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible is flying over all this. This is what's happening down on the ground, like in the real world. Obviously, it's not a realistic movie. It's a surreal kind of thing. But those moments that you've liked, for me, the film was laden with them. You did a great job of describing that scene where Adrienne Shelley comes home and her mother has set this trap for her, and you're expecting some massive big explosion and you don't get that, and then it cuts to her in the shower, and it's like such a powerful shot and such an amazing moment, because you're literally just watching a girl in the shower just barely even reacting or like doing any kind of major facial expression or something, but it's like so loaded for you as a viewer, and you can kind of be trying to like you're trying to understand, you know, when someone's gone through something terrible and you look and they're just sort of like frozen and you're an outside observer and looking at it. Like, I think the film is full of brilliant moments, like full to the point of like they're almost constant in the movie. And I think, you know, one thing I come back to, we've got obviously done our big Wim Wenders marathon, and we've watched so many films over the last, well, our entire lives, I suppose, but certainly we've been doing it recently as well. These films where I think the vibe and the tone of the film are an enormous part of the appeal or repellent from the film. And I think, you know, there's directors like Wes Anderson is a perfect example where one of us likes him a lot more than the other. There's directors who have a tone that like people are like queuing up on like opening day, like take my money, I want that tone. And then there's other people who are like, I tried that once, I don't ever want if I could be around that tone again. And you know, we're probably, I don't know that we're as extreme in that regard, but there are some that we're like, we don't like, or we do like that person because of their tone. But then there's other directors, and I'd say Wim Wenders is a great example of this actually, where we have, or I'll speak for myself, I have a capacity to like that tone, capacity to love that tone, that you get me in the right mood, the right night, the right conditions, and that tone can be like one of my best viewing experiences of the year. But I can't just fucking sit down to that tone with zero prep or like no knowledge of what it is and just guarantee that it's going to hit the sweet spot. Not necessarily, it won't. So you mentioned at the top there that you kind of wish that you'd been given a vibe spoiler for this movie, and that's probably a good ground rule in a way to set up, where, because it's difficult, because let's say I say such and such movie is slow, there isn't, like, that could be the best thing I could possibly say to you. I'm not talking about this movie, but just a hypothetical movie, Nuri Bilge Ceylan or something like that. I could maybe be setting you up to just adore that movie by just going, just prepare yourself for it's going to be slow. Or I could be just getting some little worm in the back of your mind that is messing with the viewing experience or taking you out of it because you're like thinking about the overall pacing of the film when you should be immersed in it. And it's difficult to know what should and shouldn't be said. But I think if you're, going in completely unseen, I guess for me, I felt like because we came to this from the Day Trickers, and maybe I was mentioning him alongside Aki Kaurismäki, who I think is the biggest reference point, that you might have enough going into it. But it is very much, when I think back on him, because I didn't really remember anything that happened in this movie, and I don't really remember anything that happened in The Unbelievable Truth. All I remembered was the vibe, and like it wasn't even a perfect memory of it, but just that Aki Kaurismäki thing of like, we're going to have to show you a few characters sort of moving around a little town, talking to each other, little events will happen here and there, and it's all a bit surreal and dreamlike. And there's something just so nice, I feel, about like this. It's not low stakes, but it's low stakes in terms of cinematic like spectacle, right? So it's obviously not low stakes because it's literally like the most important things that have happened to these people, but it's kind of low key film in a way, in terms of like what's happening in it and how, I don't know, like even if I compare it to things that are like rom-coms or sort of huge big mainstream, it's less loud somehow than that stuff. It's like and even though it is, there's lots of explosive personalities in this film, but it's just a bit more of a gentle experience. That's kind of how I think of all these directors that I keep mentioning together. This guy, I've seen two films, but I've kind of only seen one, in the sense of like I can't even remember the other one. So me watching this film now is like going back and like restarting my knowledge of him, and I had a really good time with it. Some of the stuff you mentioned, that it's not necessarily you're mentioning them as complaints, but you're just mentioning them as like observations, and they sort of betray like you weren't exactly in the right space to watch the movie. Like you mentioned offhandishly there that the jock doesn't look like a jock. And it's like, yeah, because it's not real world almost. It's like Napoleon Dynamite world, or Wes Anderson world or something, where it's a play in a way, and they're all it's dangerous to keep on like lumping everyone together because they've all got different styles, but I like that when I see I like that when I see a film like this, I'm being whisked off to another world. It's not the Lord of the Rings, but I'm being whisked off to like someone else's vision of like a fake world. And B, I happen to like that it's done with such limited budgetary resources. It gives me that nostalgia for like Clerks and all these old 90s movies that were like, we got a camera and we got the town that we live in, and we got a bunch of willing participants, let's go do it, and we can kind of make whatever world we want within certain limitations. So yeah, and even the thing of like her, I completely agree with more or less everything you say. I agree with. Like you said that, like it's not a classic come of age thing, because she's sort of like, it feels like she's lived more like the movie's probably set over a week or something. It's a very short amount of time. I'm not sure if it's literally, it could be like a month, but it's not years, and it kind of feels like we've gone through this big relationship and this big growing up of this young woman. But that again is just like, details like that to me are adding to the fairy tale quality of the film. rather than being a break away from an attempt at like reality. Just look at when that scene you referenced of when they go to the train station to meet the guy who they know is going to be, you know, reading a newspaper and smoking a pipe, and like every single guy that gets off the train is you know, looks identical. That's Wes Anderson again. That's surreal magic, alternate reality that's constructed specifically for this movie or book or comic or whatever it is. It's like it's an artistic vision. So yeah, I guess what the appropriate thing to do would be, maybe I should watch the next one, or I think I'm going to go back and watch The Unbelievable Truth, because that's the other one I've seen, and then that kind of sets me up where I've watched his first two movies, and if I want to progress from there, then I can kind of like see his later films, having seen all of his films up to that point. And then if if you want to watch it completely regardless of how much I like it, then you know, by all means do. But if you want to kind of reserve that and go, you know, just let me know if you think I'll like it more or whatever, then I'm also happy to do that. But yeah, had a good time with this one personally.
Yeah, I think the first one and the one after this is part of a thing called the Long Island trilogy. And I believe that is like a spiritual trilogy in the way that when there's Road trilogy or whatever it was called. So maybe it'll be different musings over similar themes, perhaps. I don't know. So yeah, you go ahead. I'm not out yet. I'm just underwhelmed, I suppose is the word. I didn't get my fix of being whisked off to a different world. And I hate to make this point because it doesn't really bother me usually. And I guess it's the type of thing it bothers you if you're having a good time with the film less. And I just felt, and I'm somebody who watches, like, I really like things like Clerks and Dead Man's Shoes and like really low budget things sometimes. I mean, Dead Man's Shoes is a masterpiece, to be fair, but the lack of budget at times was glaring. And in terms of, you mentioned the quarterback, it's meant to be a play, it's not meant to look like a quarterback. Yeah, that's fine, but for me, he's the only actor they could find. It felt like, so stuff like that take me out of it a little. And it's not normally a complaint I'd have, and it is unfair, but that was my viewing experience. And you're right, it is tricky when framing something like it's a slow movie. I wouldn't like to hear anything about a movie beforehand. It's the type of thing you can only say in retrospect, because okay, now I've got a reference point and a bit of a flavor. So then, if it was the same filmmaker, you know, I could ask you: Is this Wes Anderson-y, or is this more the Darjeeling Limited Wes Anderson? You know what I mean? And so we can talk without talking. Whereas that the next Hal Hartley movie, it could be framed in some kind of way, but I would have hated to have heard it beforehand. Any kind of thing that would give me any indication, including it's a slow movie, including it's a low budget movie. So it is tricky. And with that in mind, I feel like you you comparing Day Trippers to Hal Hartley's work probably actually harmed my expectations, because if you recall, I really loved the Day Trippers, like much more than you, who liked it a lot. So I'm thinking, oh yeah, I'm gonna get more of that. Wow, like we've only got one Day Trippers, because after that he did Superbad and stuff like that. Oh, am I gonna find another route? And for me, this is nothing like Day Trippers. Really, it's nothing like that film at all. Like in in terms of the feeling and vibe and the exact pitch that I got from that movie. Whereas I think your reference to Aki Kaurismäki, the Finnish director, is definitely something I can see a lot more. So I think perhaps even the framing of this movie inadvertently by you has had some kind of impact. And that's why I'm almost willing to continue with another movie just to see what I can get from it now, having heard your conversation and your framing of it and having my expectation altered. I might be able to give it a bit more of a fair crack.
Yeah, I can definitely see how, like, suggesting that it was going to be anything like The Day Trippers is that could be very misleading. And I definitely think Kaurismäki is like him and Jarmusch are much more what I'd associate. Now, when we watched Day Trippers, we had this conversation about, is it like a feel-good quirk fest like Little Miss Sunshine, or is it more of a grounded, more darker, not darker, but you know what I mean, like less like just constantly trying to make you charmed type of movie. And I think for me, the reason why I associate a lot of these directors together is that and Day Trippers, I feel like completely fits this, is they're taking the banal, for want of a better word, just like this area of the world that the movie light is typically not shone on, of just like, you know, small towns, regular supermarkets, all that kind of stuff. And they're turning that into an adventure story. And you can go super quirky, like over the top magical realism type direction with it, which is fine. There's good stuff that's been done in that. But you can also do something that is more like the way I think of this movie, Trust, is it's kind of like a slightly surreal version of EastEnders, like all that stuff in the bar or like the place where he works, and you know, like the Jock character as well, which is, I think the Jock is almost like to me it's almost less like this is the only person they could get, which it may well be, but it reads more like this is actually how glamorous and unmacho and unlike, you know, Marvel hero the Jocks really look like, the star quarterback in a small town. This is what they actually look like. But I don't know, it's all just like understated and low key, a lot of it. And it's, like I said, it's kind of the EastEndersness or the soap opera-ness of just like people in a small town bouncing off each other, but with this kind of surreal slant on it. So I would be fascinated to see how much you'd like a movie by him that was basically exactly like this, but just with that preparation. As you said, it's difficult to, like, for starters, I don't even know how I would prepare someone for this, like trying to explain the specificity of this tone. But even if I could, it's like you said, is that a spoiler? To what extent is that a spoiler? And we've talked about this loads, where we'll, you know, see a film by a director and like maybe not get it, and then like we've watched a few films by that director and we kind of get it, in quotes, and we're almost becoming curious about like how much would I like that first movie, or how much would I like that movie that even it doesn't have to be a director, it could just be like any body of work, like a really specific subgenre or style of movie or origin of movie or whatever, where you kind of, once you get your head around that thing, maybe you could even go back and see the one that you didn't like. Because I would almost put money on you liking Trust, like really liking Trust, but also all the things that you didn't like about it, I feel are totally there. It's not like what the fuck was he watching? Like, it's like, yeah, that is what the movie's like. And I guess it's the movie that you probably need to be somewhat in the right mood for, and maybe it is expectations, I don't know. But yeah, I'll let you know how I fare with what's its name, The Unbelievable Truth. Interesting to hear that it's part of a spiritual trilogy, which I always like, and I'm always curious to see if it's actually got any worth thinking of it that way, or if it's more of like a marketing, like film criticism thing. But yeah, Let's see how I get on with it.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.